Good morning, class. I thought I'd give a quick little video about dangling and misplaced modifiers. Just bear with me. I'm sort of going through a head cold, seasonal cold. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to take each one of these little sections that I sent out by email. Remember the grammar practice that I sent about quiz 2 and quiz 3 over the weekend. They deal with misplaced and dangling modifiers, which will probably be on your quiz 2. And then you have your subject verb agreement and pronoun antecedent and reference agreement, which will be on quiz 3. So what I'm going to do is probably give you, at least 4 really quick videos, I hope, go over those practice problems. Hopefully you had some time to go through some of those. If not, I would recommend probably attempting to do the practice before watching the video because the video is going to have the answers to them. And especially if you want to do well on quiz 2 and quiz 3, you probably need to know how to do it, because there won't be necessarily a video with your answers for quiz 2 and quiz 3 when you have to actually take those 2 quizzes and submit those. I probably will also give a quick little video on your next essay, which if you looked at your week folder, for this week. We're basically, the first week was narration, and that was just devoted to one particular 7-day period. The next major, if you call it major, the next sort of genre of writing that we're going to be tackling is going to be description, and we're actually doing that in 2 weeks. So we're taking week 2 and week 3. That's why if you looked at your weekly folder, that's why it says weeks 2 through 3, because you're going to have quiz 2 this week, quiz 3 next week, and then pretty much the next 2 weeks you're devoting to writing your next essay, which would be the description. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that entails as far as um, the topics, the directions are up in your week 2 folder. And that might be why, if some of y'all look at the actual folder this week, you're like, man, there's more stuff here than there was last week. And that's because we're taking 2 weeks to do description. Next week or after week 3, when we get into week 4 and 5, I believe we're doing process analysis next. So we're taking, weeks 4 and 5 to do that. So the weekly folders are going to look jam-packed, but just keep in mind, it's basically covering a 14-day period. So what I would probably suggest, if you're trying to figure out, well, what should I focus? I mean, obviously focus on turning in what is due, like the quizzes and that type stuff. But if you look at the actual folders, maybe look at the first 7 items one week and then the next 7 items or whatever's left the following week. You don't have to necessarily try to cram everything in to a 7-week period here, especially with the material online. I would recommend, though, that if you didn't save stuff, websites, handouts, that type stuff from week 1, that you definitely do that for weeks 2 and 3, because you may need it from one week to the next as we get later in the semester. Um, Remember that you do have your essay 1 that is going to be due if you haven't turned it in. Some of you have already started to turn stuff in. Just keep up with all the readings and all the due dates, and everything should be good on your end as it relates to not getting zeros for turning stuff in, because anything's better than a 0 at this point. The other thing is, be careful of sending. Some of y'all are sending stuff to the Dropbox already, and I don't know if you're getting confused with, are you actually turning it in as your final draft, or you're wanting me to look at it as a rough draft? Remember, rough drafts you need to send to me as a Microsoft Word attachment to my email account, because when you send stuff to the Dropbox early and don't really specify whether you're doing it as a draft or as a final draft, Blackboard's going to sort of force me to grade whatever's in that slot. So it's going to act like that is your final grade. That's the one you want me to grade. So you want to be careful with that. Um, just send your rough drafts to my email account so I can give you feedback. The other thing is, make sure it is Microsoft Word doc or docx file, because if you're sending a PDF file, the only thing I can basically do is read it and give it a grade. I mean, I can't mark up a PDF file like I can a Microsoft Word file. So if you're sending PDFs, just know, I mean, if that's what you want me to grade, I will just read it and give it a grade. But if you want to know the feedback and sort of the reason why you got the grade, so you're not making the same similar mistakes, say in future writings and that type of stuff, then, definitely send a doc or docx file, specifically Microsoft Word, because that works well on the school computers, that works well on my home computers, because if I can't download it or if I can't open it, then the grade's going to have to stay that, remain the zero until I'm able to open something that I can read. The same thing with the quizzes, quiz one, once you turn the quizzes in, I will provide feedback if you get something wrong. I mean, there's been a lot of folks that made hundreds on the quiz, so I'm just looking at them. You didn't get anything wrong, so I'm not going to mark them up because there's nothing to mark up. So I just give you the 100 and upload that grade into the Blackboard. Now, if you're missing one, two, three, whatever, I will give you feedback. You're just going to have to go back to Blackboard and look, where you uploaded that. Usually if you look in your grades, it'll give you a couple options there to pull down, but the feedback is either going to be on the document itself, it's going to be on a little box that is provided for feedback, or if I download it and put feedback, it's going to be with the comments and the suggestions section in the little bubbles on the Microsoft Word file. So you will get feedback, especially if you get something wrong. And that's usually what I do with with the rough drafts of the essays and the final drafts of the essays. So I don't believe, unless you got something, like I said, if it's 100% correct, then, there's really no reason for me to mark your paper up because you got everything right. All right, so let's go ahead and look at these particular, we're going to look at, hopefully you're able to see my screen. We're going to look at dangling and misplaced modifiers first, and then I will come back here in a bit with another video that deals with pronoun antecedent agreement and subject-verb agreement. All right, so if we look at our basic definition of what misplaced and dangling modifiers are, you can kind of see that here. And both are phrases within a sentence that are not placed properly and cause confusion because of their misplacement. They cause illogical sentences that are both grammatically incorrect and difficult to understand. Modifiers should modify nouns, adding further information that gives the reader a greater understanding of the noun. So when you're thinking about dangling modifiers especially, which when we look at sort of these first two, we're dealing with dangling modifiers here. You really want to add a noun to make it make sense. And if you look here at the original, working on my computer, the power went out and I lost all of my work, which hopefully when you're doing your essays, that won't happen, because that is not a good thing or a good feeling when you're having to sort of either rewrite because you didn't save it, or, especially when there's a deadline that is approaching. And that usually, stuff goes wrong usually when there's big storms that come through the area and something gets hit by lightning, transformer blows, and we don't think, you think most of your computers are set up for autosave and that type stuff, and most of the Microsoft Word programs are, but you just want to be careful and make sure that you're saving your work multiple times in multiple locations. So if you look here, really the key is this pronoun I. That's what we're probably going to need to use again somewhere, because if you look, this is the problem. Working on my computer, the power went out. Well, somebody has to be working. And really you need to have this pronoun I. So that's why I put here. And then we also need to add. You may have to add a little bit of wordage or verbiage to your dangling modifier. So the correct version of this would be, while I, right, here's that pronoun I again, was working on my computer, the power went out and I lost all of my work. So really what you needed to do is truly just add while I, and was, because now we need a verb to go with working. So really, you only needed to add three things to the sentence, and it's really up front. So don't let these quizzes, especially quiz one, some of y'all, most of y'all did pretty well, I think, on quiz one, which is good. Don't overthink these quizzes. The quizzes are not meant to be for you to overthink. Um, so just be wary of that. When we look at number two, it says when defrost, marinate meat for half an hour, and then you are ready to grill. Well, again, we sort of have our noun here, which is meat. The problem is we don't really know what's being defrost. I mean, we can assume in our mind it has to be, something meat related, but it could be a frozen dinner, it could be a pizza, we don't know. So we need to add that meat as your main noun a little closer at the beginning. So when we look at our answers, when meat is defrost. So now we have meat is, we need that, and basically in between when and defrost, marinate it. So now we're just basically replacing meat here with it, because meat and it, they go together here at this point, for half an hour, and then you are ready to grill. So again, the only thing that you really needed to change or really add in is meat is, and then you need to put it to replace meat, because really if you put meat there again, I guess you could do it. It just sounds redundant. Meat, when meat is defrost, marinate meat for, so it's just easier to use it there. But if you had something like that on your quiz and you just left meat here again, I would give you credit because it still makes sense to me. Uh, Number three is also sort of dealing with a um, Dangling modifier. I smelled fresh flowers entering the reception hall. So again, you need something a little bit before. Usually you can kind of tell half of your problem and what you're going to need to use to fix that problem with the original sentence. So here, as you can tell, we have I. So we're going to need to use I. So again, we want to add a little bit as I was entering. So we're moving this stuff around. So in some ways, you can look at this as being a dangling modifier, but really it's more or less a misplaced modifier, because it says, as I was entering the reception hall, I smelled fresh flowers. So again, we need that pronoun, we need that noun there to make this sentence a little bit more logically and to read a little bit more smoothly. If you look at number four, when buying a car, variety prices and all the add-on options usually confuse the average buyer. So again, who's buying the car? Well, I guess it's this average buyer. So we need to move that average buyer. And this is another one of those classic misplaced modifiers from the back of the sentence closer to what that average buyer is usually confused about and what he's trying to do, right? So he's trying to buy a car. So when we look at our correct version, when buying a car, average buyer is usually confused by variety, prices, and all the add-on options. So again, we're just moving that noun up closer to what it needs to modify. And in this case, the average buyer, well, it's the car buyer, and they are confused about the variety, the prices, and all the add-ons. So that makes sense once you move average buyer from the back of the sentence to sort of the middle part of the sentence. On completing your group project, the next assignment is designing a web page. Again, another classic example of misplaced modifier. If you look at our answer choice, after you complete your group project, your next assignment will be designing a web page. So again, at this point, we're keeping second person since we started with second person in the sentence. Just keep in mind when you're writing essays, you generally don't want to use you or your or any sort of contractions of the second person. You want to sort of stick with first or third persons when you're writing formal essays. The other thing is that I'm seeing too is contractions. You want to spell those out in former papers too, because it makes it look a little bit more sophisticated and professional. Plus, if you're worried about length or word count, it will give you 2 words compared to 1 word. So I hope this sort of clarifies and gives you sort of some guidance on how to approach misplaced and dangling modifiers. We will return back here momentarily to talk about the other half of that particular practice sheet that I sent out by email, which is subject-verb agreement and pronoun antecedent agreement.